The World Health Organization has called for a massive global effort to vaccinate 10% of the population of every country against COVID-19 by September. Speaking at the opening of the World Health Assembly, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has announced the need for a wartime mindset if countries are to get on top of the pandemic. Floyd Cush reports.
Global leaders have convened for crisis talks at the WHO's annual Health Assembly. It may be the most important meeting in the organisation's history as the world wages war on the coronavirus. More cases have been reported so far this year than in the whole of 2020.
The COVID-19 pandemic has brought a tsunami of sufferings. Over 3.4 million lives have been lost. Some 500 million jobs have gone. Trillions of dollars have been wiped from global balance sheets. The most vulnerable are suffering most, and I fear this is far from over.
The head of the WHO has condemned wealthy nations for hoarding vaccines, saying more than 75% of all jabs have been administered in just 10 countries. But he says it's not too late to act.
I'm calling on member states to support a massive push to vaccinate at least 10% of the population of every country by September, and a drive to December to achieve our goal of vaccinating at least 30% by the end of the year.
The WHO has outlined a three-pronged approach. It says more vaccines need to be sent to COVAX. Just 72 million doses have been donated to the initiative, which aims to ensure equitable access. The organisation says technology needs to be shared by waiving vaccine intellectual property rights, and that countries should adopt the urgency of a wartime economy to massively scale up production.
We are at war with the virus. We need the logic and urgency of a war economy to boost the capacity of our weapons, the vaccines.
But the temptation to hoard vaccines may prove too strong to resist as economies reel from pandemic restrictions. German researchers say the fallout from COVID-19 has cost the country $366 billion since the pandemic was declared last March. And the grim scenes in India, which has now recorded more than 300,000 coronavirus deaths, are a reminder of what happens when the virus spreads out of control. But if countries do prioritise themselves, Guterres has warned the consequences will be grave.
Sadly, unless we act now, we face a situation in which rich countries vaccinate the majority of their people and open their economies, while the virus continues to cause deep suffering by circling and mutating in the poorest countries.
It's a desperate appeal to the WHO's 194 member states that only by uniting will the world be able to defeat COVID-19. Floyd Cush, TRT World.
Julia Lyubova joins us live from Geneva with more details. Welcome to the program. Now, as we heard from that news report, the WHO is calling for more vaccines to be donated to its COVAX facility. Tell us, how has this facility fared so far?
Well, that's right. The COVAX program is one of the main topics on the agenda for the World Health Assembly, which has got underway in Geneva on Monday. And we actually heard from the head of the World Health Organization who addressed this assembly, and he urged countries to donate vaccines to the COVAX mechanism. He said that to deal with the pandemic, countries around the world need to vaccinate 10% of their population by September this year and 30% of their populations by the end of this year. Well, actually, according to this COVAX mechanism, 2 billion doses need to be distributed by the end of 2021. And just last week, for example, UNICEF said that what should have been 170 million doses at that stage, only 65 million have been donated so far. So for sure, it's actually not on track as such. 65 million out of possible 170 million, and of course with a target of being 2 billion by the end of this year. And indeed, most of the leaders spoke of this inequity, a scandalous inequity, what the World Health Organization's head said, which has been hitting COVAX in this vaccine distribution. Tedros actually urged manufacturers of vaccines around the world to give COVAX the first right of refusal on new volumes of vaccines or to commit to 50% of their volumes to COVAX. And well, to close this gap in COVAX production, the G7 countries and the EU need to share just 20% of their production of vaccines to COVAX in just the summer months, June, July, and August. And of course, all of this depends on these actions from the richer countries and from the EU.
And yet that has not happened. We are seeing a massive shortfall in the amount of vaccine needed. What about this other demand of waiving intellectual property rights, at least temporarily, on these vaccines? Are we seeing any traction on that front, or any pressure from the UN to get companies and countries to comply?
Indeed, the intellectual property rights waivers have been on the agenda, actually, at the United Nations and indeed at the World Trade Organization recently. It was one of the main issues raised during its General Council held in Geneva just a few weeks ago. And well, the proposal for these waivers was originally made by South Africa and by India. And initially, there was opposition from the US, for example, the EU, and from pharmaceutical companies. But just a few weeks ago, the United States made a reversal in its position when Biden actually showed support for these waivers. And this could change the rest of the member states of the World Trade Organization. But for example, the wording of this proposal has been changed as well to address some of the concerns, namely one by the European Union, which will include a limited time frame for these waivers. But of course, these discussions, they will take some time, and it could be months before any negotiations come to fruition, because of course, there has to be a consensus among member states for any decision to be made.
Time, of course, is the enemy there. A grim warning, really, from the UN and from the World Health Organization. Thank you, Julia Lyubova, as always.